Good afternoon, another story from the Og Diaries. This one's called Food, Glorious Food, and it includes all of the Ogs as they were invited to work with a group of young people on a sustainable food project. And it was written, I wrote the story in 2013, so that's 7 years ago, but I think as you hear the story unfold, it has a huge amount of relevance for now. It seems like it was written for today, doesn't it? Okay, it does go on a little bit, so I'm not sure whether to break it up with the discussion points that are also in there. That was the purpose of it, to sort of break down and think about some of the things we were talking about. So you may find that you want to just pause and listen to those as well. Okay, anyway, here we go. Food, glorious food. Mammoth was feeling quite pleased with himself today. He had predicted bad weather was on its way, and judging by the noise outside, it was indeed a wet and windy start. He popped his head out of the teepee and was instantly sucked out by the wind into the drizzle. "Whoa!" he called as he steadied himself on the pebbles. We may have trouble keeping the fire alight today," he muttered to himself. He was just moving some dry driftwood towards the cave behind him when all of a sudden a plastic bag blew past him. Mammoth tried to grab it so he could place it in the repurposing store, but the wind was so strong and Mammoth was so light that he was lifted off the ground into the air. "Ah!" shouted Mammoth. "Help me!" "Oh, Mammoth, that looks great fun," said Graham, just coming out of the teepee. He looked up into the air and saw several plastic bags flying around. When the next plastic bag blew past, he too grabbed onto a handle and was lifted up into the air. "Yippee!" cried Graham. "This is so much fun." Granny Annie had come out to see what all the noise was about. "Oh, Mammoth, do be careful," she called as he drifted nearer and nearer to the sea. She picked up a long piece of driftwood and ran towards him and shouted, "Mammoth, grab hold of the stick." Mammoth let go of a handle and grabbed the one end of the stick. Granny Annie lowered him down to the ground. "Oh, phew," said Mammoth, dusting himself down. "Pass me that bag, Mammoth. I am going to have a go," said Granny Annie, who never missed an opportunity for an adventure. "Granny Annie, are you sure?" asked Mammoth, but before he could say any more, she was up in the air with Graham floating gracefully. It was precisely this point the children appeared on the beach. The children always came to the settlement when the weather was bad. They liked to check that the Ogs were okay. "Granny Annie, Graham, what are you doing? Let me help you down," said the eldest child. "No, we are fine, aren't we, Graham? This is so much fun, children. You should have a go," called Granny Annie. All of a sudden the wind picked up and Graham flew off towards the rocks at great speed. "Ah!" shrieked Graham as the Og settlement got further and further away and the rocks got closer. "Hold on, Graham, I'm coming to get you," cried Granny Annie as she pulled down on her right hand, which was holding one handle, turning herself round like a bird caught in the breeze, and flew over towards Graham. The noise had woken up the other Ogs. Along with the children, they ran towards Graham as he had landed awkwardly on the rocks further down the beach. They arrived to witness Granny Annie land her plastic bag with style next to him. Everyone cheered at Granny Annie's skill before turning their attention to Graham, who was laying on the rock. "I have torn my trousers," he said grumpily. "You are lucky that's all you tore," replied the children. "What on earth made you think that parachuting with a plastic bag was a good idea?" asked the children. "Well, I saw Mammoth doing it and it looked fun," he said. "It is fun," said Granny Annie as she caught the next breeze and guided herself back up into the air towards the settlement. All they could hear was her voice fading, "See you back at Camp Ogs," as she got further and further away. "Well, I didn't try to do it," said Mammoth. "I was trying to collect the bag. It was blowing around the air, so I wanted to put it in the repurposing store." "What is going on anyway? Why is there so much rubbish flying around us?" asked Mammoth. "It's because it's Thursday. You should see our street. Everyone puts out all their rubbish on a Thursday. The recycling is blowing everywhere. Plastic bottles and yoghurt cartons are rolling up and down the road because of this wind," said the youngest of the children. "Well, it isn't all the wind's fault, to be fair," said the elder of the children. If we didn't buy so much, then we wouldn't have all this recycling, would we? The crazy thing is, we have only got half an hour with you now because Mum says we need to go shopping. That means we are going to the supermarket to buy more rubbish for recycling because everything is wrapped in packaging, she added indignantly. Now I know I'm getting a bit old, but did I hear you right? Did you say you are going to a supermarket to buy more rubbish to recycle? Why on earth would you do that? Inquired Nana Peg. The Ogs had not heard about supermarkets. They prided themselves on feeding from the environment around them and topping up with any leftover food the children brought them from home. They had not thought of where the children got their food from. They had been more concerned with the huge amounts of leftovers the children turned up with. It had been assumed that, like themselves, they adapted their environment to feed themselves. Where was all this food coming from, thought Mammoth. Things may be worse than I first thought, he blurted out as he hurried off towards the teepee, calling, I will be back in a moment. I need to go and consult the Og Diaries. He called to Peg as he left. Peg, ask them if they grow anything themselves. Do you grow any vegetables? Nana Peg asked the children politely. We sometimes grow a few things, but Mum and Dad say they haven't got enough time. Once they bought all the seeds, plants and fertiliser, it gets so expensive and very messy and time-consuming, so Mum tends to go to the supermarket in town to save time and energy. Ah, so the supermarket is where all the locally grown food gets taken to sell. Is it like a market? Asked Peg. Well, yes and no, answered the eldest child. It's actually quite hard to find locally grown food in the supermarket. Mum says it's not always possible to buy British grown food, she added. Oh my goodness, I'm getting really confused now. So you are too busy, so you don't grow your own food and you don't always buy food grown locally, and often your food isn't even from Britain. Well, where does your food come from? Asked Peg, with a surprised edge to her voice. The youngest child picks up some of the rubbish that had blown down onto the beach to show the Ogs what it said on the wrapper. Well, this packaging once was for biscuits. Do you remember the biscuits we bought you the other day that sent Howie all mad? Well, they are the same as these, and it says that they were made in Holland. When did you have time to go to Holland? Why on earth would someone go to Holland to buy their food? Inquired Peg. No, we wouldn't have had to travel to Holland. The supermarket has food from all over the world for us to buy, added the youngest. But how does all this food get to the supermarket? Asked Peg, putting her hands up in the air in frustration. The children looked at each other a little blankly. At this point, Mammoth returned with a handful of Og Diaries. Well, children, I think it's about time you found out. These diaries contain a record of Og observations made over hundreds and hundreds of years. I think it is about time we shared them with you. Things seem to have changed incredibly since we last revealed ourselves, he said. Whoa, chorused the children, looking at the huge pile of fabric and paperwork he was carrying. Oh, no, we have to go back now to go shopping with Mum, said the youngest sadly. That's fine, we can wait till you return, said Mammoth. It will give us time to explore the diaries to see if we can make sense of what is happening. While you're away with Mum, I have prepared a couple of tasks for you to complete. Here, take these new Og Diaries to make your notes in, added Mammoth. This is what I want you to do, children. Task 1 said, I want you to make notes in your new diaries of all the different packaging you see in the supermarket. What materials are used? Task 2, I want you to consider how the food in the supermarket travels from all these different places, whether it be from Holland or Wales. Task 3, I also want you to consider why your mum chooses the different food you come back with. Mammoth then asked the children to bring the ingredients for their favourite meal so they could prepare it with them on the fire. OK, Mammoth, this should be interesting, laughed the eldest child. Let's hope Mum is in a good mood. Normally she gets really fed up with us interfering when we have to be, so we will have to be very clever about this. During the 2 hours that the children had been away shopping, the Ogs had each taken a different diary and found a quiet place to sit and read. Mammoth had instructed them to highlight anything that would explain how different funny folk over time had fed themselves. They had gone through diary after diary. There were diaries made of animal skin, linen and cottons, velvet and woven wool. Each diary was a record of their findings and observations over the centuries, and represented a time when funny folk were experiencing enormous changes in their environment and their lives. The Ogs always emerged during these periods of change simply because the funny folk were often at their most confused and anxious. Mammoth would have heard the sound of despair and uncertainty and emerged to help the funny folk cope with the changes. The last time they had emerged was after the Second World War, when the landscape in some places had been damaged beyond recognition. They had been called by the funny folk who were struggling to cope with the loss of their family and friends, their livelihoods, and were worried how they could develop a future and meet their needs. The Ogs had helped them through the war years by helping them to be as innovative and thoughtful with their food consumption and lifestyle needs. Folk had to be very careful about how they used their food, as it was rationed and scarce. Furthermore, the Ogs helped them to focus on working as a community to build their futures once again. When the Ogs had left the funny folk after this assignment, they were happy to see folk, even in the towns, growing their own vegetables once again, walking to local grocery stores to shop. It was a very sociable time, Mammoth remembered. Everyone knew everyone. Could this have all changed? Mammoth thought to himself. He began to set up the flip chart that he had made from some old wood he had found recently, and when he looked up, he saw the children climbing down onto the beach. They had completed their task and asked if they could tell the Ogs what they had found. The eldest child started. "It's amazing! Nearly all our fruit and veg are packed in plastic, and even if they are loose, they give us a plastic bag to put them in. Mum picked up a few bits that were loose because she said she didn't want a big full bag. She does try to get food that is unpackaged and fresh, but she says sometimes it's not possible. To try to keep to a budget, we more often than not look for the cheapest or what is on offer. We buy strawberries, though, every week. They are my favourite," said the eldest child. "But how can you have strawberries every week?" asked Tom, who knew a lot about weather and climate. "Strawberries need warm growing conditions. I thought you funny folk had seasons, and a fruit like strawberries only grows here in the summer, surely." The eldest child looked at the packaging and said, "Oh, these ones have come from Spain. It's warmer out there all the time, isn't it?" "How does it get here? Spain is so far away. I'm starting to see what's happening now," said Tom, looking to Mammoth for confirmation. "This is where the packaging comes in, isn't it? To keep it safe when it travels to this supermarket." "Yes," replied Mammoth. "It seems supermarkets get them from countries that can grow them all year round. But if you are buying strawberries from Spain, how do you think they get here?" "Well, I don't suppose you can post them. They would all get squashed," suggested the youngest of the children. "Don't they come by aeroplane or boat or perhaps train, Mammoth?" said the eldest. "That's right," replied Mammoth, "and this is where the packaging starts to increase. Something like strawberries are very soft and need to be protected as they travel all this way. But by the time they reach your plate, they have travelled thousands of miles at terrific speed to keep fresh. Furthermore, they need to last for as long as possible, otherwise no one will want to buy them. That must involve an awful lot of energy just to get you those strawberries whenever you want them." The children thought about this and added, "Nearly everything else we bought was packaged in cardboard, then inside was more plastic. We also bought lots of tinned foods. On all the packaging there was loads of writing and pictures and numbers of measurements. I could find out exactly what is in the food, its weight and how much fat, sugar and salt it had in it and where it came from. And as to where all our food comes from, well, the list is enormous," explained the eldest of the children, as she reeled off a list as tall as herself. "And sometimes there are pictures of the people that made it. Look," she said as she passed around a picture of a lady milk farmer who lives in somewhere called Sussex. The Ogs all had a good look at the picture. "Oh, isn't she nice?" said Granny. "Oh, yes, look at her lovely long hair. How does she manage to milk the cows with all that hair blowing around?" asked Eleanor. "Let me have a look at her," said Grandpa Duck. "That's not a woman's job. It's far too messy and hard." "Grandpa Duck," chorused all the ladies. "You were obviously given the wrong Og Diary to read, Grandpa Duck. If you had had the diary I was looking at, you would have realised just how important women are in the whole of the food-growing process, and how difficult it has been for ladies to be treated equally to men," said Clarice indignantly. Clarice pointed to the belt around her waist. She was an ambassador for women's rights through the ages, and unlike many suffragettes, she didn't burn her bra. She wore her bra-strap belt with pride. The children finished off by saying, Grandpa Duck muttered underneath his breath, "I'm ever so sorry, ladies." The children finished off by saying, "Mum also says that being able to get everything under one roof rather than going all round the different local shops is brilliant. She says she wastes so much time going to lots of different places and it can get very expensive. Thank you, children, said Mammoth. Now tell us what you have bought to prepare for dinner tonight. Oh, that was my choice, Mammoth, said the youngest of the children. We have bought fish fingers, sausages, hot dog, and my favourite baked beans. And for pudding, we chose lots of fruit. We have strawberries, kiwi, bananas, fresh pineapple, and a tin of fruit cocktail. Fish fingers? Called Aggie, who up to now had been very quiet. In all my days, I have never seen a fish with fingers. They must be very special. And did you also say hot dogs? Do you really eat hot dogs? That seems a bit cruel, she asked. No, Aggie, they are not real fingers off a fish, and the hot dogs are not actually dogs that are hot. We call them fish fingers because they have been shaped to look like our fingers, said the eldest child. And I don't really know why we call them hot dogs. But why would you want to eat your fingers? Do you eat your fingers as well, then? Asked Aggie questioningly. I don't think they do, said Mammoth. Let's take a look at all this food and see what they have brought us. Mammoth called to the Ogs and to the children. Gather round, everyone. Let's see if we can answer some of these questions. Okay, we need to start at the beginning, don't we? Now, who took the wild boar skin diary? Asked Mammoth. That was me and Billy, said Phoebe. Phoebe put her notes up on the flip chart. To the untrained eye, it looked like a series of squiggly lines and strange pictures. Take us through it then, Phoebe. Tell us what you found. Tell us what I found during my early adventures when the world was a very sustainable place, said Mammoth. What do you mean sustainable? The Ogs and children chorused. I'm referring to a time when there were none of these supermarkets that you've been telling us about, and there was no waste. You didn't need to buy land or food to live on, because the land was owned by no one but shared by all kinds of species who fed from it. Each species, including these very early funny folk, survived by adapting the environment. The funny folk spent their time and energy on how they could use the land to feed their tribe. It was Howie who spoke up next. Hey, dude, it sounds like these early species were like us. We adapt our environment all the time, don't we? We don't need to own the land, do we? That's right, Howie. We are very similar. Early funny folk made everything from nature. Can you take us through the pictures, Phoebe? Asked Mammoth. These pictures show early funny folk using stone and the bones of the animals they shared their environment with to make tools to fight and hunt and work with. They hunted and gathered their food from their surroundings. They made homes and clothes from what they found in nature, and over many years their tools got better as they found new resources such as stone and iron and other materials. Is that okay, Mammoth? Asked Phoebe. That is very good. It is important to understand that this diary is trying to show you that early funny folk were very clever, and even though their surrounding environments was very simple and very dangerous, they learnt to use nature. Let's have a look at what they may have eaten, said Mammoth. All the diary said was they ate whatever they could get their hands on. This included things like wild animals, wild fruits, fish and nuts and honey, and perhaps birds' eggs. Mammoth, why is it important that we know about these early funny folk? Said the youngest of the children. Well, the important point I want to make here is that these early funny folk were very close to the world around them. They looked to nature for guidance. They learnt from nature. They lived in balance with their surroundings. So yes, as Howie pointed out, early funny folk were just like us, or should I say us Ogs are very similar to early funny folk. Furthermore, I think we can still learn a lot from early funny folk, finished Mammoth. Like what? Asked the oldest. Well, modern funny folk still have simple needs. We still only need to find food, shelter and warmth to survive, but we have lots of ways to do this now. People do not need to make or find their food anymore, and like you, they often don't even know where the food on their table comes from. You said earlier you get in a car and drive to a big supermarket and buy food that is all clean and packaged and processed to make you want to buy it. Judging by the amount of waste you've been bringing down to us, you obviously don't value it that much, or why would you waste so much? Yet it requires so much energy to produce it, he added. Billy remembered something from the diary and began to talk next. These early funny folk would waste nothing, because unless they could guarantee they would find more food for the next day, they would make what they had last and ensure everyone was fed. Very good, Billy, said Mammoth. Even as funny folk became more civilised and began to be even more organised in how they lived, they couldn't preserve food very easily, so food had to be managed to cope with changes in weather and so forth. Who looked in the cream canvas diary? Oh, that was me and Eleanor, said Sylvie. This showed us how early organised folk fed themselves. And An example of these are the ancient Romans, apparently. Sylvie hung her diary up and talked about their food and how clever they were. These folk were good farmers. They had started to keep animals and produce dairy food as well as meat from the animals. It said in the diary that they thought milk was barbaric. I think that means they thought it was nasty, so they didn't drink it but made cheeses from it. They also had things like oil and had discovered they could grow and process corn and cereals to make bread. They loved wine as well, and they would have it watered down and warmed with spices. Mind you, not everyone was lucky enough to eat well. The poorer folk had to drink a wine that was like vinegar. "Oh!" cried the Ogs. "Very good, Sylvie." Farming and food continued to become more varied as funny folk started to move around and begin occupying new land. We refer to these folk as civilised, yet some of their behaviour was far from civilised. In fact, they were quite gruesome. Their entertainment consisted of watching folk showing off how they could defeat some of the strongest animals, such as lions, said Mammoth. However, they may have stopped walking around half naked, but even when they began dressing in fine fabric and heavy armour, they still had to rely heavily on the weather and hard work to generate food. When there was a good harvest, the funny folk would feast well, and when fighting or poor weather occurred, they would struggle to eat. "Who looked in the rough Hessian diary?" said Mammoth. "That was me and Graham," said Kenneth. "We got really confused, though, because they seemed to have loads of food, but apparently they were very unhealthy," he added. "Ah, yes, Kenneth, this diary covers an enormous period of time called the Middle Ages. It's hard to know exactly when it started and finished," agreed Mammoth. "It's just that depending on how rich you were, determined what you ate. But then you would think that the richer people would eat better than the poorer, wouldn't you?" asked Kenneth. "But that isn't what happened. The poor folk ate lots of homegrown food and a few animals they could farm, but they were not allowed to hunt like the rich could. In fact, they would be killed if they were caught hunting, or even have their hands cut off." "Oh, that's awful," squealed Sylvie. The poor had more vegetables and fruits, nuts and honey, providing they could access land to grow it on. And the rich ate huge amounts of meat and fish and pies and breads, and very few vegetables, but some fruits, finished Kenneth. "What about dairy foods?" asked Mammoth. "Oh, the poorer folk ate them, but the richer folk thought they were inferior foods, so didn't eat them. The rich had all sorts of poor health conditions because of it. They had bad teeth, skin diseases, scurvy and rickets," said Kenneth. The youngest child turned the pages and asked, "What's that funny picture of a face with a bubble coming out of the mouth?" "Ah, these folk had dreadful manners. The rich ate huge amounts of food at large tables. They were called feasts, and they showed their appreciation by belching and burping from both ends," said Kenneth, laughing. "Do you remember when we released David Apshenkin up in Gwydir Forest? Well, he would have fitted in well here." "You would have fitted in well here, Grandpa Duck, as well," said Clarice, who was often complaining about Grandpa Duck's manners. "But Mammoth, if we still have simple needs, and if it's so easy to just adapt nature to live, then why don't people still do it?" asked the youngest of the children. "Okay, it's what happened next that made a big difference, children," he replied. "As time moves on, more and more people are born. With all these new mouths to feed, land was worked more intensively than before, and more food was sold to make money to buy other things. But this was only the beginning of what we are seeing today. The big change happened a few hundred years ago. Funny folk have always been good at making things, and new machines were invented that could work faster. This has been called the Industrial Revolution," explained Mammoth. "Oh, I know about this, Mammoth," said the youngest of the children excitedly. "We are doing this in school. We changed from producing everything by hand to using different machines that needed to be powered by steam, wood and then coal. Our roads changed and everything. And let's not forget, the number of funny folk continue to increase in numbers that we Ogs find difficult to imagine. With the Industrial Revolution came great wealth for many, and more folk moved towards the larger towns and cities that had developed around new and successful industries. The textile mills up in the north of Britain are a perfect example of as people that moved towards as all the people that moved towards London. Who found out about the food in these times?" "It was in the diary with the woven fabric cover," said Mammoth. "Oh, that was us," said Clarice and Aggie. It was awful, Mammoth. So much of their food had poisons in it because there were so many mouths to feed among the poor. They did all kinds of things to make the food go further and taste nicer. But it was often harmful. Food was also very contaminated due to all the sewage and stuff all over the streets. At least if they were out in the countryside, they had a better chance of eating a bit better. But these were quite grim times regarding food, finished Clarice. I think things gradually improved with industrial Britain. They improved how sewage was dealt with and introduced sanitation and drainage measures for water, added Aggie. It is strange because some of the foods that we're eating during these times were quite sophisticated. The cakes and wafers and such looked delicious and very ornate and decorative. The rich ate quite a bit of tinned meat, whilst the poor stuck to fresh meat, which was cheaper. They still didn't have brilliant ways to keep food, fresh only in ice rooms to keep it chilled. The diary showed us that funny folk did travel a bit more now and learned about other food and cultures, and Britain had begun to set up colonies in faraway places to grow sugar on big plantations, finished Aggie. Mammoth took a big breath and sighed. What is it, Mammoth? Asked the children. As I said earlier, the last time the Ogs were called was just after the Second World War. It seems so much has changed. It sounds like funny folk have got better and better at growing food. Food production seems to be focused more on meeting the needs of whole countries and large populations. And judging by the amount of food you folk waste, it seems all more focused on not just making enough food, but about having as much choice as possible. This must be why you now have everything under one roof, as there are so many things to choose from, suggested Tom. I expect it must be very competitive for a food producer trying to get their products into the supermarket. I would imagine that these businesses would want to get food as cheap as possible, he added. Unfortunately, cheap doesn't always mean better, in my opinion. There are other things funny folk need to consider, said Mammoth. What sort of things? Asked the youngest of the children, who then turned to her elder sister, saying, Mum often talks about needing to get the most out of our money, doesn't she? Well, if your job is to produce food, then you need to make a living doing it, don't you? If you have to keep competing with all the other people making the same food, you will try to cut your costs down more and more. The demand for cheap food may end up with people in poorer countries not being able to make a living doing it. Food needs to be traded fairly. We know about fair trade. We have days in school called Fair Trade Days, said the youngest child excitedly. But every day should be a fair trade day, really. Things have changed so much. Funny folks' lives are very different to early funny folk. Early folks' work was survival. It seems you don't need to hunt food anymore to survive. It sounds like this is left to those who put the food in the supermarkets. Judging by what you children did today when you went off shopping, funny folk now allocate their time in their day to shop for food, and depending on how much time or interest they have, they may put different ingredients together and produce meals, or they may buy meals already made for them, said Mammoth. When you all looked at all the ingredients that were in your food, we can start to understand that so much happens to it before it reaches you. I've noticed that when we eat too much of your food, said Mammoth, we feel different. I wonder if it has anything to do with all the fat and sugar and salt that we've seen in it now. When we looked at the packaging, you must have noticed we've all put on a little bit of weight, Ogs, and to be honest, after one of your heavy meals, I don't want to do anything except have a rest. Us Ogs use food as fuel, but this fuel isn't working for us children, concluded Mammoth. Sorry, Ogs, we didn't realise you didn't like our food, said the youngest child sadly. It's not that we don't like it, it's just we need a balance of food to keep our energy levels up. All this fat and processing will drain us, but don't get me wrong, I can see why it's popular because it tastes lovely, said Mammoth. Also, children, I like the idea of knowing what I'm eating, don't you? He asked. I'm starting to understand why you called us now. You may not have realised it, but I think things must be very out of balance. Do you remember that first day you called out in despair? Oh, I wish someone could make all these environmental problems go away, you said. You were worried about the crazy weather when it was supposed to be summer. You were anxious about all the waste. And you had heard teachers and even pop stars talking about global warming and carbon footprints. It's one big cycle. Modern funny folk must realise that some vital processes must have been stopped by such intensive food production across the world, said Mammoth. What do you mean? Asked the youngest. I think modern funny folk may have interfered with nature, said Mammoth, but surely that is good. You said earlier the closer you are to nature, the better it is. So to interfere with nature would mean you got quite close, said the eldest child. But funny folk have interfered in an unsustainable way. Oh, there's that funny word again, said the younger child. Well, you need to get used to it, children. Funny folk need to think about sustainable food and consider how you grow and consume food in the future, and not just for today. But what did it all mean, Mammoth? Asked Granny Annie. Well, let's think about how your food buying and eating patterns affect the world around us. We need to help the funny folk realise what they need to do to become more sustainable. If we start with food, which is the fuel of the funny folk, then I think we can make a real difference. Food makes the funny folk work. It gives them energy. It keeps them alive. The environment is obviously not coping with the pressure it is under, and we need to think about being smarter. Don't forget, food needs to be celebrated. It is, after all, amazing to think that from a simple seed comes a plant such as wheat and corn, and from that plant can come flour, and from flour can come bread and cakes. It is quite miraculous. Let us celebrate it. Sorry, I've lost my... Oh, I think we're going to need some help here, said the youngest of the children, and she looked out and saw all the Ogs. Will you help us? She said. I am so confused. Mammoth turned round and collected his special flip chart and said, children, do you know how you can make the most difference? Said the children, not wanting to say the wrong thing. It's simple. You just need to care. If everybody cared about what is happening, then things have a chance of changing. Once you care, you will want to make small changes in your lives. For example, you may grow your own vegetables. You may decide to look to see what you can get from your local community shops. You may decide you will not buy anything fresh that is packaged. One simple change could make the world of difference, said Mammoth. All the Ogs looked out at the young people. All the Ogs looked out at the children and said, you are the lucky ones now, because you know about this. There are lots of funny folk who don't, and perhaps this is your chance to find a way to let them know that you care about what is happening to the environment. Thank you for listening. I know it was a long one. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll put it up on my website, and there'll be extra discussion points that you can follow up as well if you want to. Okay, thank you.